So, free will versus determinism. It's a question that has fascinated mankind since we got out of the trees. It's no accident that the likes of Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Descartes, Hobbes, Kant, Russell, all of them have tried to answer the question of whether or not mankind has free will, or whether they are at the behest of the environment around them and whatever that might entail. It's understandable that it's such a key question. To be in charge of your own destiny, to have agency over the universe around you, to be an actor in your own life, these are things that we would feel like some sort of automaton, like some kind of robot, if we didn't feel we had that ability. And it feels in our conscious mind as though we have that ability. When you wake up in the morning, you choose cornflakes, you choose Weetabix, you choose to get into your car or walk to work. These feel like the choices of a free mind, and so it's understandable that that's how most of us feel. I was about 12 when I was introduced to this idea, and for 3 years I was hesitant to accept it. In fact, downright obstinate. I wouldn't accept it for the same reason, that I felt like I had these choices in front of me that I was making, and that I had free will to do so. It took a lot of discussion and a lot of debate before I was ready to turn around and start to look at, and a lot of study, to look at the arguments from different perspectives. And a couple of them stood out as the ones that really swayed me in my opinion, forming towards the deterministic side, as it is now firmly. I wanted to go through those with you because so often when we talk about free will versus determinism, it kind of always boils down to, well, so you're telling me that if I decide to have Weetabix, I can't choose to have cornflakes, and it often, the argument kind of degrades down, and it's not often very helpful. The determinist arguer will start to say, well, no, you have the choice, but you must make one of the choices, and you can't make both, and it gets complicated. So I wanted to try and distill the arguments down into something that is understandable and relatable. So let's take a look at the first example. It's a variation of the argument determinism by environment, and I hope you enjoy it. I shot it on a beach, so enjoy that. Let's say you and I are on a beach, and I ask you to take a handful of sand, and from this handful of sand I ask you to select just one grain. Now, if you can't find free will here, then it probably doesn't exist. And as you shift through the millions of grains of sand and you start to try to select one, your attention is suddenly taken away from you by a screeching car. As you return to the grains of sand, you realize you can't possibly pick the same one twice, and so you have to start to try to make another selection. And then you're distracted again by perhaps a wasp or a bee. And as you return a third time, you're onto already your third grain of sand. How can we think that free will exists if even selecting a grain of sand, a completely arbitrary choice, the free will is removed by external factors? You weren't free to choose the first grain of sand because the car screeched to a halt. You weren't free to choose the second grain of sand because of the bee buzzing around your head. That's a good example, but it isn't perhaps the major reason I don't think there's such a thing as free will. The real reason I don't think there's free will is actually got a lot more to do with the way in which we make our choices. Okay, so you'll see there that the argument really comes down to the idea that environmental factors are complete in shaping us, and that because those environmental factors are not under your control, you have no capability to change them. This argument really starts in the womb. It starts at conception. You know, when you were conceived, did you choose to be conceived? No, you did not. How were you carried to full term? Did your mum exercise regularly? What did she eat? Did you choose that? No, you did not. When you were born, did you choose the hospital you were born in? Did you choose how your parents raised you? Did you choose your genetics? You certainly didn't choose your genetics. So it comes down to asking yourself, when did you make your first free will choice? Was it 1 when you were a toddler? Was it 2? Was it 3 or 4 as you became a young person, as a young child? Was it 7, 8, 9, 10 Was it 18 when you first got legal majority? When did you make your first choice? And I don't think anybody can answer that question. And there's a simple reason for that, is because you were never in charge of anything. You never had the agency to make a decision, because everything that came before it led you to that point. And so, of course, you've got Weetabix, and of course you've got Kellogg's cornflakes, but you will choose the one that you were going to choose, and there is nothing that can change that. Whoever you are and whatever your preference is, and however you've come into this world, will lead you to a point to make a specific decision that is the only decision you could have ever made. Okay? So the key thing here is that there is a difference between choice and a decision. Okay? A choice is something we of course have. No determinist in the world would argue that you don't have choice. You've got billions of choices every day. You've got billions of choices you can make. But the decision that you come to will be the only decision you could have possibly made, given what occurred to you up to that point, up to that exact point in time. The things that went before it will be the things that inform you making a specific decision that absolutely only you could have made. Now, there's another argument I want to go over, which is the argument by reduction. And this is a really interesting one, because it starts from a place we can all agree that you don't have free will, and it brings you back down to the everyday. So let's start off with a categorization of 4 different things. Level 4 being the most severe, level 1 being the everyday. Okay, so level 4 instances of where you may not have free will are the physical. So the example here is Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the 19th century, and he was by everyone that knew him said he was a lovely guy. He was courteous, kind, generous, giving, very nice guy, very gentle, very softly spoken. While he was working on the railroad, there was an accident, and he had a metal rod blasted from an explosion through his skull, and it went right through his brain. Miraculously, he was saved by the doctors at the time. The spike was taken out, and he made a recovery. He led a reasonably normal life, except for the fact that after the accident, he was angry, calcitrant, he swore a lot, he was incredibly rude, completely different person. Now, we'd have to agree that that wasn't his choice. He didn't choose to become that new person. That was forced upon him by physical changes in the brain. And so a physical change in your brain can remove your free will. That's an important distinction to make. Another example is a 40-year-old school teacher at the beginning of the 21st century who suffered a tumor in the right lobe of the optifrontal cortex. Now that's the one that's known to affect the judgment and the impulse control. And this is a perfectly normal 40-year-old family man, school teacher, and he went from that to a paedophile. And it's a horrifying case. He started to obsess over children and do all the things that a paedophile may do. He was arrested and tried. And they, during normal medical routine, they detected a tumor, and they removed the tumor, and all of the impulses went away. For 3 years, then they came back. He was checked back into hospital, and the tumor had come back. So that is undeniably an instance where physical change took away somebody's ability to self-determine, to self-control, to make a free will choice was taken away from them. So that's level 4. Level 3 is where perhaps we see people on drugs, so LSD, ecstasy, cocaine, or a pharmaceutical drug like an antidepressant or some other psychoactive drug that causes them to act in a way that they would not normally act. Now, at that point, it's very difficult to say that that person on LSD has got the capability to choose not to see the pink flamingos flying gently through the room, or whatever it is that they see. They can't choose not to see that. So their free will has been taken away from them in a pharmaceutical way, in a psychoactive way. And that's level 3. Level 2 is where we start to see things creeping in that we all suffer from. The example here, it's not exactly watertight, but the example here is judges. Hungry judges are said to give harsher sentences. So as we near lunchtime or we get late into the afternoon, sentence lengths universally increase. Now there's several arguments as to why that might not be exactly down to hunger, but the point is things like this affect us. Hunger, our levels of various hormones, testosterone in the male, estrogen in the female. All of these things have an effect on how we behave. You don't have to go far to find video footage or even a direct story of somebody who's been affected by testosterone. They saw the red mist. The French in the French legal system have a special type of plea, which is a plea of passion, to say that I was so impassioned, I was so inflamed that what I did, I murdered the man that was having relations with my wife. I came into the room, I saw them together, I had a red mist, and I killed the man. And that's a special plea in the French justice system, because there's instances where you simply cannot control yourself. So your free will can be taken away by things like the chemistry of the brain. And now let's get down to the everyday. Let's get down to category one. The things that every day you stub your toe, you had an argument with a wife, your kid is in financial trouble. These are things that will affect your behavior in a real way. And all of them, when you combine them all together, form what is in effect an inability for you to control your own decision making. So that's two of the arguments that I think are relevant. The third is, for me, the absolute clincher. Okay, the latest psychological study, I'll post a link, or the latest psychological research, I'll post a link below, is that decision making in the unconscious mind is made substantially earlier than the conscious mind is aware of. So if we take the example of the sand that you saw earlier in this video on the beach, the subconscious part of my mind would have already chosen the grain of sand before my conscious mind will perceive it. And this is, for me, huge. So this has been studied, as I say, the link's in the bio underneath. This has been studied now very carefully. You give somebody an arbitrary decision. For example, you give them shapes on a screen and you ask them to choose their favorite shape, and they choose their favorite shape by hitting one of three buttons, okay? Using brain scanning techniques and technologies, we're able to monitor the movement centers of the brain that act before a decision has been reached. And we can clearly see that the decision people make, which button to push, as they say, I've decided, and push a button, it can be as much as 3 seconds beforehand that the subconscious part of their brain has decided which button to push. Now, think about that. If decision making only comes to your conscious mind 3 seconds after your subconscious mind has decided which one to do, which choice to take, how can you possibly have free will? It's literally an impossibility for you to have free will if you're not even aware of the decision making process taking place in your subconscious mind. How can you possibly claim to have agency of the decisions once they get to your conscious mind? And that, for me, is the absolute pinnacle of the argument as to why we don't have free will. I hope this video has enlightened you. All I'm trying to do is get the points I think are most relevant out there, and I hope this has helped you, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you very much for watching.